Okay, guys, welcome to Social Studies. This unit's on the Cold War, and to give you some context, the Cold War started after World War II, so probably in the early 1950s, and really it was a war between the United States and Russia. At the time, it was called the Soviet Union. They were the two biggest superpowers, and they were basically kind of in a fight for who was trying to dominate the world. And kind of came down to we had kind of two different economic systems. In the Soviet Union, they had communism, and in the United States, we had capitalism. And that's really what this unit's about. It's kind of the difference between communism and capitalism. And those will be two big terms that you will hear on the socialized portion of the task test. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over kind of the differences between communism and capitalism. And then there's some questions at the end. So this is Frederick Engels' definition of communism. Communism is the doctrine of the conditions of the liberation of the proletariat. It's kind of complicated, but we'll break it down for you. The proletariat is a class of society which lives entirely from the sale of its labor and does not draw profit from any kind of capital, whose weal and woe, whose life and death, whose sole existence depends on the demand for labor, hence the changing state of a business and the vagaries of unbridled competition. The proletariat, a class of proletariats, in a word, is a working class in the 19th century. So basically that would be all the people that work. And the thing is, it says they don't make, they don't draw any profit. So they're basically working for the government, or sometimes you'll hear the government referred to as a state. So everything they do goes to the state, okay, or the government. So they're not making any money themselves. Everything goes back to the government or the state. So it says, what would be the course of this revolution? It says democracy would be wholly valueless to the proletariat if it were not immediately used as a means for putting through measures directed against private property, ensuring the livelihoods of the proletariat. The main measures emerging as a necessary result of existing relations are the following. So this is kind of some of the cores of communism. So limitation of private property through progressive taxation, heavy inheritance tax, abolition of inheritance through collateral lines, brothers, nephews, forced loans. So no one really in communist country, there's very little private property. That means the government owns all the business, all the houses, everything, transportation. The government owns all that. There's very few private ownerships. Gradual exportation of landowners, industrialists, railroads, magnates, and ship owners, probably through competition of state industry, probably directly through compensation for the form of bonds. So you wouldn't be able to, like in our country, all the airlines like American, Southwest, United, those are private airlines. In a communist country, the government would own all that. Trailways, Greyhound, the buses, all the transportation would be owned by the government. And if you did own private property, they would continue to raise your taxes until they try to force you out of private ownership. Third one, confiscation of the possession of all immigrants and rebels against the majority of the people. So what they would try to do, if you were against, the government, they would try to take any possessions you had and turn them into state property. Fourth one, organization of labor, employment of proletariat and publicly owned land and factories and workshops, with competition among the workers being abolished, and with the factory owners, as far as they still exist, being obliged to pay the same high wages as those paid by the state. So the state would own all the companies. Everyone would get paid the same. They try to, like I said, they don't want private companies. Like in our country, you work for a company, the company can pay you whatever they want to pay you. They would try to prohibit that in communist countries. They want everyone to make the same amount of money. Next one, equal obligation of all member states to work on such a time as private property has been completely abolished. Formation of industrial harmony, especially for agriculture. So, everyone works the same hours, everyone gets paid the same. They try to take over the farms. So even, the farmers, everything you're growing goes to the government. They want everything going to the state. Okay. The next one would be centralization of all money and credit in the hands of the state through a national bank with a state capital and the suppression of private banks and bankers. So once again, there's no private banks. Obviously, you guys have a choice when you get paid or you get money. You can put it in any bank you want. Certain banks have higher interest rates. Credit unions sometimes are a little bit better. But in communism, the government would own all the banks. That way they can basically set the interest rates. It'd be one interest rate. That way no one is making more money than anyone else. They try to discourage that. Okay. Increase the number of national factories, workshops, railroads, ships, bringing new land into cultivation, improvement land area and cultivation, all in proportion to the growth of capital labor force at the disposal of the nation. So all the factories, once again, would be, they try to make more national factories, more national railroads. All the shipbuilding places would be owned by the government. Any land that basically the country might acquire would go to the government. So you guys get the idea. Government really controls everything. Next one, education of children from the moment. So the government runs all the schools. They teach all the same things. There aren't any private schools, there aren't any Catholic schools, there aren't any charter schools. It's all state-run education. So the government controls all aspects of education. You can see they try to do that very early. It says as soon as they leave the mother's care. The last one, concentration of all means of transportation in the hands of the nation. Once again, the government controls all the transportation. So there wouldn't be any private transportation, like Uber or Lyft. They wouldn't exist there. If they did, the government would basically be run by the government. So you're always working for the government. So it says it's impossible, of course, to carry all these measures out at once, but one will always bring others in its wake. Once the first radical attack on private property has been launched, the proletariat finds themselves forced to go even further, to concentrate increasingly in the hands of the state, all capital, all agriculture, all transport, all trade. All foregoing measures are directed to this end. They will become practical and feasible, capable of producing the centralized effects precisely the degree of the proletariat through its labor multiplies the country's productive forces. So everyone, they want more and more and more people working for the government or the state. And then finally, once basically they've got all that, that would be kind of the ideal situation for communism, that everyone is under the control of the state. Okay. And then at the end, private property will disappear. So no one owns a house, business, a farm. The government owns all of it. Okay. So those are kind of the main components of communism. And then capitalism, it's kind of the exact opposite. And currently in the United States, you guys probably, if you don't know, it is capitalism, because you can own private property, you can own your own business, you get to make as much as your employer pays you. The government does own some stuff, but there is most of it's private. Most of our houses, we pay a mortgage on them. So there is a lot more freedom to start your own business. Like I mentioned, the airlines are private companies, buses, Trailways, Greyhound are private. So what this says is capitalism is an economic system where property, for example, are owned by people or individuals, not by government or communities. people have to barter or work for money so they can buy things they need, such as food. Capitalism mostly has a free market economy, which people buy and sell things by their own judgment. So when you go to the store, you can charge whatever the store can charge whatever they want. When you're a farmer, you can sell your product for whatever you want to sell it for. Obviously, if you sell it too high, people are going to buy cheaper fruits and vegetables. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. And there's kind of competition. So that's a big thing. There's not just one farm, there's several farmers, and the competition is good for us because theoretically it drives the price down. And you can basically, sometimes if you want, you can buy the lowest price. That's really up to you, depending on your job and how much money you make. The same thing, companies can pay, not all companies pay the exact same wage. There's competition. If you're in a job and you're not making how much money you think you should be making, you're always free to go try to find a job at a company that pays more. So in most countries in the world today, the economy also is a degree of planning done by the government or by trade unions. They're actually called mixed economies instead of a completely free market. Some people disagree where capitalism is a good idea or how much capitalism is a good idea. So even in the United States, it's not completely free market. The government does have some price controls. Sometimes housing markets, they're capped. There's like rent control in some cities. That'd be the government saying you just can't charge $4,000 for one bedroom apartment. So there is a little bit of government intervention, but for the most part, they try to rely on competition. But the government does. There is a little bit of government intervention in capitalism. So the word capital meaning something of value that can be money, financial capital, or other goods can be traded. The word capital originally comes from the Latin word caput, meaning head. It was used to mean how a head of cattle is a rich person owned days long ago, or cattle used in land. In fact, the words capital and cattle both come from caput. So our country, it used to be a barter system. You would, if you raise cattle, you would trade that to maybe someone that grew cotton. That way you could make sheets, clothes, things like that, and vice versa. So before we had money, you bartered, you took your, whatever, your milk to market and traded that for cotton. You took your beef to market, traded that. Whatever, if you're making jewelry, you would take that to market. And that in itself is capital because you're trading it for something else. Okay. So it said the philosopher Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations, was an important book that developed the idea of capitalism free market. The word capitalism was not used until the late 19th century. So that was the late 1800s is really where capitalism took off in our country. So buying, selling, working, and hiring. In capitalism, people may sell or lend their property and other people may buy or borrow. If one person wants to buy, another person wants to sell, they do not need to get permission from a higher power. People have a market, buying and selling, which either without anyone telling them to do. People who own capital are sometimes called capitalists. People who support capitalism are called capitalists too. They can hire anyone who works in their factories, shops, or land and pay them what they offer. The word capital can be used to mean things that produce more things or money. For example, land, factory, shops, tools, and machines are called capital. If someone has money that can be invested, that money is called capital too. So capital is almost anything of value that we have. Obviously, if you own a lot of land, that's considered capital. You own a factory, that's capital. You own a lot of cars or a car dealership, that's capital because it's something of value. So it says in capitalist system, many people are workers. They are employed to earn money for a living. People can choose to work for anyone who will hire them in a free market. That's what I was saying. You can go get a job anywhere you want. You can keep looking for a job until you get paid what you want to pay. And there's nothing preventing you from doing that. And this is different from older economy systems. In feudalism, most people were serfs, had to work for the people who owned the land they lived on, or mercantilism. The government makes it hard to buy things from other countries. In many countries, mixed economies, part capitalism, part socialist, there are laws about what you can buy or sell and what price you can charge or who you can hire or fire. That talks about investing. Investment is when people invest, give their money to things. People can put their money together to buy or build things, even if they're too big for one person to make. That happens in our country. You want to open a whatever a restaurant, you might get 3 or 4 people to invest in that. That way, you don't have to, not everyone has. You don't have to put up all the money, or you can get people in the community to invest in your business. That happens quite a bit. So investing is important to capitalists, or capitalist can mean two things. It can mean someone who likes capitalists, but also means someone who invests. For example, a venture capitalist invests in new business. That's, if you're buying stocks, you're an investor. You're investing in companies, businesses, things like that. People who start business or investments make a lot of money. A business sells things that people want. The investor makes extra money, which is called a profit. Obviously, a profit when you open a business, any money you make above your operating costs, paying your labor, paying your food costs in a restaurant, that would be profit. Okay. So people agree. There are different words for people who support capitalism in many parts of the world. These people here are called conservative or liberals, especially market liberals. In the United States, the word liberal can mean someone who believes, leans towards socialism, what other countries might call social liberal. Libertarian is a word in America that means, some other countries mean someone wants the government to have little or no power to tell people what to buy or sell. And capitalists should say people who are poor should get the help if they need it from charities instead of the state. That happens a little bit in our country, when people are against food stamps, social programs. If that's something you believe in, you might probably consider our country libertarian. They don't want the government helping people. They think government should stay out of it. That's basically, true capitalists. They don't want the government basically involved at all. So people who support capitalism also have disagreements. Most people agree that capitalism works better if the government keeps people from stealing other people's things. If people could steal anything, then no one wants to buy anything. In most countries, the government does more than that. It tries to make sure people buy and sell fairly. The employment is fair because the government takes a lot of money in tax, also buys a lot of things and gives money away. It spends money on guns and shifts from military, on science research in universities and schools and libraries. It also gives money to people who don't have jobs and businesses the political leaders think are important. Sometimes the government gives money to people just because these people support politicians who are in office. When the government is in charge of part of the economy, it's called the mixed economy. So that's what we have in the United States, a mixed economy. Obviously, you pay taxes, and then those taxes go to the roads, parks, schools, social programs. Are all part of kind of that mixed economy. And sometimes the government, they prevent price gouging. And we saw a little bit of that during the pandemic when people are charging, $10 for a bottle of Clorox, things like that. The government usually steps in to prevent that from happening. Because then, the people making are just going to get super rich and we get poor because you're paying $10 for a box of Clorox wipes. It usually costs $1.99 or $2, whatever they cost. So the government sometimes steps in and makes sure that we're not taking advantage of. A few people think that people can protect themselves without any government, and that's not necessarily always the case. I mean, I wouldn't believe that because I think we just saw people could charge, if they wanted, they could charge. Food could be super expensive. They could charge $10 for an apple, $10 for a banana. Some people could afford that, but most of us couldn't. So down here, what this is just a chart. So you're going to compare communism and capitalism. So property, for example, in communism, the government or the state owns most all the property. In capitalism, it's mostly privately owned. Role of the government in communism, government basically controls everything. In capitalism, they control very little. So what you're going to do is just in this chart, you're just going to fill out the difference between capitalism and communism. And this is a Cold War. When did the Cold War start? Remember I told you it started after World War II. It ended probably 1990. When the Berlin Wall came down. The causes, it was just the United States and Russia, the two superpowers, fighting over who was going to control the world and what two countries are primarily involved in the Cold War. That would be the United States and the Soviet Union. I think in class I showed you a video on this. What effects did the Cold War both have nationally and globally? Obviously, globally, all the other countries, you were probably trying to align with either Russia or, excuse me, the Soviet Union or the United States because you were obviously afraid of either communism or capitalism. And you tried to align with the country you basically thought was most like yours. And it was kind of like the United States and the Soviet Union were the two bullies, just like in school, the biggest, strongest person. You sometimes want to buddy up with them in case something happens. And in simplest terms, that was happening with the Cold War. Nationally, in our country, we were basically probably anti-Soviet Union, and in the Soviet Union, they're anti-United States. We both thought the other one was bad, and our countries basically made us think that. And some of it was true, some of it maybe not true. I mean, there's probably good aspects of both communism and capitalism, but sometimes it's taken to the extreme, and governments put out propaganda which wants you to think the other one is bad. So that's really what was going on nationally. And also, one thing, at that time, there was a race for like nuclear weapons, and obviously, nuclear weapons could destroy the world. So, actually, in 1960, we almost had a nuclear war. Russia had some ships off the coast of Cuba with nuclear missiles pointed at the United States. It's called the Bay of Pigs, and it was John F. Kennedy was president. So we almost got in a nuclear war in the early 1960s, which would have obviously devastated both countries, would have devastated the world. Nuclear weapons, once they go off, the radiation would have been, both countries would have been devastated. Obviously, Canada, Mexico, Eastern Europe, even Europe, if we were to send nuclear weapons into Russia, Japan, China, because that radiation gets in the air, and basically the world would have been destroyed. Then it just says, why do you think we're studying the Cold War in this unit? And what traditions did the Cold War introduce to the political world today? I think the traditions would be capitalism and communism and nationalism too. Basically both countries really got behind each other. The Soviet Union was really anti-American, and obviously in the United States we were anti-Soviet Union. That's kind of a form of nationalism. So this was just basically after World War II. After that war, there was whenever there's a war, after a war, there's a vacuum of power, and countries are always fighting to take control. It's like, who's the new king of the hill? And after the Second World War, it was really the United States and the Soviet Union were vying of who was really trying to control the world. So that was just a brief lesson in capitalism, communism. You can go ahead and go back and fill out this chart, and have a wonderful day, you guys, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.